The moment the hotel receptionist slid 2 key cards across the marble desk and said, "With genuine professional calm, you're in room 214, the double," I understood that the evening had already decided to stop cooperating with us. Mara's hand was resting in the crook of my arm the way it had been for the past 6 hours. Lightly. Practiced. Convincing enough that her aunt had twice squeezed my forearm and called me a wonderful man. She didn't look at the key cards. She looked at the receptionist. Then, she looked at me. Any sensible person in that situation would have asked for another room. 2 rooms. Any arrangement that did not involve 1 bed and 2 people who were, technically, strangers performing a fiction for an audience that had gone to sleep 40 minutes ago. Mara did not ask for another room. She picked up both key cards, handed me one, and said, quietly, "We'll figure it out." Her voice was steady. Her free hand had closed around the silver pen she always kept in her jacket pocket, and she was pressing it gently into her palm in the particular way she did when she had already decided something and was waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. I stood there, holding a key card to a room that contained 1 bed and a woman I was technically engaged to, in the understanding that neither of those things was entirely what it appeared to be. The evening had not asked my opinion about any of this. I followed her toward the lift. "My name is Daniel Carr. I'm 34. I work as a structural surveyor, which means I spend most of my professional life looking at things that appear sound from the outside and determining exactly where the stress is being concealed. This is, in retrospect, either excellent or terrible preparation for the preceding 6 hours. I am the kind of person who notices things before I know what to do with them. I have been told, by people who mean it as a neutral observation, that I am difficult to read. I prefer to think of it as considered. I make a decision once I am certain. The problem is that certainty, in certain situations involving certain people, takes longer than is strictly practical. I do not, as a general rule, have particularly reliable instincts about situations involving Mara Whitfield. I have simply not admitted this to myself in those specific terms until recently. Mara Whitfield was the younger sister of a woman I had dated for 14 months, 4 years ago. The relationship ended quietly, without damage on either side, in the way 2 people sometimes agree that the life they were building together was a very nice idea that belonged to someone else. Her sister Priya was in Singapore now. We had not spoken since the summer she left. Mara and I had existed in a comfortable periphery of each other's lives during those 14 months, her appearing at dinners, at family events, always with that silver pen clicking between her fingers, always watching proceedings with a slight air of private amusement. After Priya left, we had stayed in loose, occasional contact. Enough that when she had called me 3 weeks ago, I had answered without hesitating. She had said, with a directness that was completely characteristic of her, "I need someone to be my fiancé for a weekend. It's my cousin Nisha's wedding. My family will be there. You are the only person I trust not to make it strange." She had paused. "It will probably be a little strange, but you won't make it worse." I had said yes. I am still examining the speed at which I said it. The existing dynamic between us was this: we were not friends exactly, but we were people who were genuinely glad when the other one appeared in a room. That distinction, I had always thought, was self-explanatory. I had been wrong about that. The wedding was in Shropshire, at a manor house that smelled of old stone and fresh roses, and something underneath both of those things that I could only describe as continuity. The kind of place that makes you feel vaguely responsible for your posture. Mara had briefed me in the car on the way up. Her family was warm, traditional, and enthusiastically invested in everyone's romantic arrangements. Her mother had been asking about a partner for 3 years. Her aunt, her mother's sister, the one who would be watching most closely, had a known preference for men who were, in her words, settled. Mara had told them, 3 months ago, about a fiancé named Daniel. She had used my actual name. She had not planned to call me. Then, she had. She handed me a small card as we turned off the motorway. She had written in her precise, slightly compressed handwriting a list of details I should know. Where we had met. The date of our first dinner. My favorite restaurant, which she had apparently already told her mother. The name of our imaginary dog, which was, she had decided, Gerald, you gave our imaginary dog a name. Gerald is a very reassuring name for a dog, she said, without apology. He settles arguments. I had looked at the card again. She had listed Gerald's breed as well. She had given our imaginary dog a breed. I kept this observation to myself. The wedding itself was everything a wedding in a Shropshire manor in late October should be. Candlelight and laughter, and the kind of happiness that fills a room so completely you feel it physically, like warmth after cold. The bride's dress caught the light when she moved. The speeches ran long, and no one minded. Outside, through the tall windows, frost was forming on the grass. Mara was extraordinary. She was warm and specific, and exactly the right version of herself. She remembered every story. She laughed at the right moments. When her aunt asked how I had known she was the one, Mara had looked at me with an expression so perfectly composed that I had almost believed it myself. I knew because she always knew what she actually thought. That turns out to be rarer than it sounds. Her aunt had clasped both my hands. Mara had gone slightly, specifically quiet in the way she went quiet when something landed differently than she had expected. Later, at dinner, her mother had asked Mara, quietly, while I was speaking to her uncle about property surveys, which is a topic that generates more conversation than you would think, something I could not hear. Mara had answered. Her mother had looked across the table at me with an expression I could not entirely interpret. Soft, careful. Like she was checking whether what she suspected could possibly be true. I noted this. I filed it away in the place I kept things I was not yet prepared to examine properly. By 9 o'clock, something had shifted in a way I could not usefully attribute to anything external. I had spent the evening performing a fiction, and the fiction had begun to feel embarrassingly close to the truth. This was not, I want to be clear, because the occasion was romantic, or because the candlelight was flattering, or because anyone had said anything particularly significant. It was because Mara, across 6 hours of sustained close proximity, had stopped being the person I carried a comfortable general warmth for, and had become something more specific. I noticed the way she laughed differently at her mother's jokes than at anyone else's. Quieter, more private. Like it came from somewhere she didn't usually let people see. I noticed the way she touched the silver pen at her collar when she was concentrating on a conversation she was not entirely comfortable in. I noticed that when she turned to me, in the middle of a conversation with her cousin, and said something unremarkable about the seating arrangement, she held the look half a beat longer than the sentence required. I told myself this was the natural consequence of 6 hours of pretending to be in love with someone. That the brain, when given sufficient instruction to simulate an emotional state, occasionally becomes confused about what is simulation and what is simply a thing that has been true for some time. I am a structural surveyor. I assess load-bearing capacity for a living. I am professionally trained to identify exactly the point at which something can no longer hold the weight being placed on it. My capacity for self-deception was proving to be professionally grade. Her flatmate had mentioned something 2 weeks earlier when she had called me to finalize the travel arrangements. I had answered, and she had said, sounding slightly caught, "Oh," she said, "you might call. I mean, she talks about you sometimes." Not about the plan, specifically, just, you know. And then she had asked to speak to Mara, who had appeared from another room with the specific expression of a person who has just overheard something they cannot acknowledge overhearing. I had not thought about that conversation again until the drive up. Then I had thought about it and chosen not to think about it, which is a different thing. At the reception, her cousin Divya had pulled me aside near the drinks table and said, in the frank and immediate way of someone who has had 2 glasses of wine and considers this clarifying, "She talks about you like you're a fact of her life. The way she talks about her flat, her job, just a thing that's simply there." She had looked at me with the particular steadiness of a person checking whether I had understood the size of what she had just said. I'm not saying anything. I'm just noticing. I had thanked her. This is not the comforting interpretation. It was the accurate one. I had gone back to the table. I had sat down next to Mara, who had been in the middle of a story about a planning dispute at her office that had been running for 8 months, and when I sat down she had continued the story as though I had always been there, mid-sentence, without looking up, in the most natural way imaginable. She had not recapped. She had not paused. She had simply continued as though my presence in the sentence was a given, and that small, unremarkable continuity had done more damage to my capacity for professional detachment than any of the preceding evidence. I am aware this is not how damage is supposed to work. I am reporting it accurately. There was also the matter of the photograph. Her aunt had gathered the family for a photograph near the fireplace at the end of the reception dinner. Mara had pulled me in without asking. She had stood beside me and her shoulder had settled against mine and she had not moved it for the duration. Afterward, when her aunt turned the screen of the camera toward us, Mara had looked at the photograph and said nothing. She had looked at it for a beat longer than was required, and then she had said, quietly, "That's a good one." She had not said it to me. She had said it to herself. That landed somewhere specific. There was something else I had noticed, which I had not had a particular name for until that evening. When Mara was talking to someone she did not fully trust, she watched their hands. When she was talking to someone she did trust, she watched their face. I had registered, somewhere in my peripheral awareness, that she had been watching my face all evening, not my hands. I had registered it and not thought about what it meant until it was 11 o'clock and we were standing in a hotel corridor. That is not a feeling. That is a feeling that has done the work, filed the forms, and is now simply waiting for me to acknowledge it. The last hour of the reception, after her aunt had gone to bed and her mother had begun saying goodnight to people in the long, careful way that means she is genuinely happy, Mara and I had found ourselves at a table in the far corner of the room. The band had moved to something quieter. The candles had shortened. The room had that particular late evening quality of warmth and low noise that makes the distance between people feel smaller than it usually is. She had not said anything for several minutes. Neither had I. This was not uncomfortable. That was the thing that I registered and chose, carefully, not to make a point of noticing. Her silver pen was on the table between us. She had taken it out at some point and set it down. She was looking at it. Her thumb moved over it once, then stopped. The music changed. Someone laughed across the room. A candle flickered. I was thinking about the card she had written in the car, the precise handwriting, the dog breed she had included because she had thought ahead to every detail, every question, everything someone might ask. And she had written it down so I wouldn't have to guess. She had thought about what I would need, and then she had provided it, quietly, without making anything of it. She looked up, not at me, but toward the dance floor, and said, quietly, more to the room than to me, almost as though she had simply forgotten to keep it inside, "I've been very comfortable tonight." It was an ordinary sentence. There was nothing extraordinary in the words themselves. But the way she said it, like it surprised her, like comfort was something that required accounting for, like she had not entirely expected to find it here. Landed somewhere I was going to have to think about later. I did not say anything immediately. I did not trust myself to say something appropriate. She didn't add to it, and the silence between us, which had always been easy, felt for the first time like it was holding something in it. Something that had been there for a while and was only now taking up the space it had always been entitled to. Then her mother appeared to collect us, touching Mara's shoulder and calling her the name she only used when she was particularly fond of the moment. And we went upstairs, and the receptionist slid 2 key cards across the marble desk, and here we were. The room was not small. That was the first thing I registered. 2 chairs near the window, a table, good curtains that blocked the courtyard lights almost completely. 1 bed, which was large and presented itself with complete neutrality, as though it had no opinion on the situation. Mara stood near the window, still in her coat, looking out at the dark. She had not turned the main light on. The lamp near the bed cast everything in amber. She said, "Without turning around, you can have the left side. You seem like a left-side person." "I don't know what that means," I said. "It means you think before you move." She paused. "I've been watching you decide things all evening." I considered this. I set my jacket over the chair. I stood near the table and looked at her, and she was still facing the window, and her hand had found the silver pen again, and she was holding it, not clicking it, just holding it, in the way she held things when the rest of her was being careful. "You don't have to explain anything tonight," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. Another silence. Longer, outside, something moved across the courtyard. A branch, wind, some ordinary piece of the night going about its business. Then she turned. She did not quite look at me. She looked at the table, at the pen in her hand, at a point somewhere between us that was not either of us. Her voice, when she spoke, was the quietest I had heard it all evening. "I stopped telling people the fiancé was made up about a week after I told them," she said. "I kept not correcting it. And then I stopped wanting to. And then I thought about that, and I picked up the phone. I went very still." She looked at the pen. Her thumb moved along it once, slowly. "That's a confession, by the way," she said. "You don't have to do anything with it." I said, "You don't have to go further if you'd rather not." She looked up. Directly, this time. Her eyes were steady in the way they went steady when she had already done the hard part internally, and was now simply waiting to see what happened next. "I know," she said again. And she did not move. The room was very quiet. Outside, somewhere below, a car moved slowly across the gravel drive. The lamp on the far side of the bed gave everything a warmth that was probably incidental, and felt, in that moment, like it had made a decision. The thing about Mara Whitfield is that she is the bravest person I know, and she manages it in a register so quiet you could miss it if you weren't paying close attention. She had just told me something real. She was still standing there, 3 feet away from me in a hotel room in Shropshire, holding a silver pen and looking at me with the particular steadiness of a person who has said the thing and is now simply letting it be said. She hadn't taken the door I'd held open. Every time something has happened in the past 3 years, something good, something I needed to say out loud to make it real, you were the first person I thought of. Before anyone else, not because you were available, not because it was convenient, because something about my understanding of a good day involves you knowing about it. That's been true for longer than I've let myself examine. and I think tonight is the night I stop not examining it." She was quiet for a long moment. Her hand closed once around the pen. Then, very deliberately, she set it down on the windowsill. She took 2 steps across the room. I met her halfway. What happened next was quiet and chosen, and absolutely nothing like the performance we had been giving all evening. It was considerably more truthful. Her phone alarm went off at 11:30. She had forgotten to cancel a reminder for a conference call she had on Monday. She swore, softly and specifically under her breath, a word I had not heard her use before, and then looked at me with an expression caught somewhere between embarrassment and laughter, and the moment, which had been serious and genuine and significant, dissolved into something warm and slightly ridiculous, and entirely us. I started laughing first. She followed. We sat on the edge of the bed in our wedding clothes and laughed at her phone alarm in a hotel room in Shropshire, and it was the most honest thing either of us had done all weekend. 6 weeks later, she corrected my grammar on a text message for the 3rd time in a single day. I told her she was being pedantic. She said precision was a professional virtue. I said she was right, and I was going to say so exactly once. She sent back the silver pen emoji, which had become her shorthand for having won something, and which I had come to find unreasonably pleasing. By spring, she had a key to my flat, and I had committed the name of her actual coffee order, not the simple version she gave to strangers, the real one she ordered when she had time, to the same category of information I keep reliably: structural tolerances, sight lines, load paths, things that matter. She still carried the silver pen everywhere. She had bought me one as well, in a darker finish, and had presented it with a completely straight face and no explanation. I used it every day. Years later, when people asked how it started, we told it differently depending on the audience. She said the fake engagement. I said the hotel room. Her mother, who had suspected something at that dinner table long before either of us had admitted it to ourselves, said she had known from the way I described how Mara argued. "You didn't sound like a man who found it inconvenient," she said. "You sounded like a man who found it interesting." She was right. I had simply needed a weekend in Shropshire to stop pretending otherwise. Nothing had come from nowhere. It had simply stopped being ignored.